Eleanor Whitmore awoke to the muted chime of the Manor's distant clock, the sound echoing through the frost-laden corridors like a summons she had not wished to receive. Sunlight, pale and tentative, fell through the tall sash windows of her chamber, illuminating the embroidered silk of her nightgown and casting delicate shadows across the polished oak floor. Today, as her mother's hurried footsteps approached, Eleanor felt the oppressive weight of anticipation press upon her slender shoulders, a heaviness far heavier than the winter fog that hung over the manor grounds. At 23, spirited and unyielding, she had imagined many things for her future. Marriage, perhaps, but not the prospect of surrendering her freedom to a man she had never met, whose name was whispered in the hushed, fearful tones of society. Her mother, Lady Whitmore, appeared at the doorway, her face a blend of pride and trepidation. "Eleanor," she said softly, the tremor in her voice betraying the rehearsed composure of the aristocrat. "The arrangements have been finalized. You must prepare yourself to meet the Duke of Ashborne." The words struck Eleanor with the force of a gale, leaving her momentarily breathless. The Duke, 65, widowed, and enshrouded in rumor, was a figure of legend in the county, both feared and revered. Stories of his melancholic demeanor and the icy corridors of Ashborne Manor had circulated among the gentry for decades, tales embroidered with exaggeration, yet never without a kernel of truth. Eleanor's heart sank at the thought of being bound to a man whose life had been carved by solitude and loss, a life in which she had no place but as an ornament to his loneliness. She dressed in a gown of muted lavender, the fabric heavy yet elegant, chosen to convey both respectability and understated charm. As she brushed her hair, dark and flowing like a river at dusk, she could not help but glance at the small mirror mounted above her vanity. Her reflection showed a face still young, with the faintest traces of worry etching her brow. She wondered, not for the first time, how such an age disparity could lead to anything resembling affection. Her mother's voice, now trembling with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, reminded her that in the rigid world of English nobility, such marriages were seldom a matter of the heart and more often a pact of convenience and survival. Eleanor had been spirited, even defiant, in the family drawing rooms, yet here she was poised to surrender to a destiny shaped by whispers, wealth, and duty. The carriage ride to Ashborne Manor was a study in silent dread. The snow crunched beneath the hooves of the horses, each step punctuating the journey with a rhythm that seemed to echo Eleanor's mounting apprehension. Outside, the countryside stretched in muted whites and grays, the skeletal trees standing as sentinels over the frostbitten fields. Eleanor gazed upon them with a sense of foreboding. The landscape seemed a mirror of her own uncertain emotions, beautiful yet forbidding, serene yet cold. The manor itself loomed ahead, a sprawling edifice of stone and shadow, its towers piercing the gray sky like silent accusations. Smoke curled from tall chimneys, whispering of fires that burned alone, perhaps in empty halls, as if the house itself mourned the absence of warmth within. When the carriage wheels halted upon the gravel, Eleanor's pulse quickened. She descended slowly, each step deliberate, her gloves clutched tightly in her hands. The heavy oak doors of Ashborne Manor opened to reveal the Duke, standing as if sculpted from marble, his stature commanding, his gaze piercing. Though aged, his bearing was still that of a man accustomed to authority, every movement measured, deliberate, and controlled. His eyes, deep set and shadowed, held a certain weariness that bespoke years of solitude. But there was also a flicker, an unspoken recognition, a fleeting vulnerability that Eleanor, despite herself, could not ignore. She felt, in that instant, the paradox of fear and fascination, a tangle of emotions that would cling to her like the winter fog. "Miss Whitmore," the Duke intoned, his voice a low resonance, formal yet tinged with a softness unexpected in a man of his reputation. Eleanor curtsied, the practiced motion of courtesy tempered by an instinctive wariness. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her presence without immediate conversation, as if measuring the girl who had been thrust into his life by the inexorable machinery of society. The household staff moved silently around them, shadows gliding over the polished marble floors, the scent of burning logs mingling with the faint perfume of winter roses that had been placed in the grand hall. Eleanor's senses absorbed it all: the chill of stone, the muted gold of candlelight, the oppressive quiet of a house accustomed to solitude. Dinner that evening was an exercise in restraint and observation. The Duke spoke little, his words deliberate, and Eleanor found herself listening with heightened attention, catching the nuances of tone and hesitation that betrayed more than the surface politeness suggested. She noticed the tremor of his hand as he lifted his goblet, a subtle quiver that hinted at vulnerability, and a faint crease of sorrow at the corners of his eyes. She realized, with a sudden pang of empathy, that behind the stern exterior lay a man who had endured loss, whose heart bore scars invisible to the casual observer. And in this realization, a spark of something unexpected, curiosity, perhaps, or the faint stirrings of affection, took root. Night fell with a hushed inevitability. Eleanor retired to her chamber, her thoughts restless, wandering through the echoes of the day's introductions, the unspoken judgments, and the fleeting glimpses of the man she was to marry. She gazed out upon the manor grounds, the snow glinting under the pale moonlight, and for the first time allowed herself a moment of honest reflection. Fear mingled with intrigue, apprehension with anticipation. Somewhere in the vast corridors of Ashborne Manor, the Duke, too, moved in silence, perhaps contemplating the strange new presence in his life, perhaps pondering the possibility of something he had long deemed impossible. Connection, companionship, perhaps even love. As the candle guttered low and the night deepened, Eleanor's eyes grew heavy with the weight of expectation and the burden of circumstance. Yet beneath it all, a quiet ember of hope remained, fragile but undeniable, waiting to be nurtured by moments yet to come. And somewhere in the darkness of his own chamber, the Duke allowed himself the faintest whisper of wonder, as though the arrival of this spirited young woman might awaken from solitude a warmth he had long forgotten. The stage was set, the players in place, and the first act of their intertwined destinies had begun, a delicate dance of duty, desire, and the uncharted territories of the heart. The morning sun cast a fragile glow over Ashborne Manor, illuminating frost-kissed roses in the sprawling gardens and the intricate tracery of the castle's stonework. Eleanor, still adjusting to the vastness and solemnity of her new home, moved through the corridors with a careful grace, every footstep measured against the echoing silence of halls that seemed accustomed to solitude. The servants, polite but distant, whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking toward her with a mixture of curiosity and faint approval, for Eleanor's reputation as the spirited Whitmore daughter had preceded her. Yet the weight of gossip was heavier here than any hall in her family's modest estate. The manor breathed judgment, each carved arch and polished banister a silent witness to decades of whispered opinion. The Duke, having observed her from the upper gallery, descended with the measured elegance of a man accustomed to command. Today, there was a subtle difference in his manner, a stiffness that softened with hesitation, as if he had rehearsed the simplest of words in his mind. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his tone formal yet tinged with a reluctant warmth, "I trust your night was tolerable." Eleanor inclined her head, noting the faint crease in his brow that betrayed a concern for propriety, and perhaps an interest in her well-being. She realized then that beneath the rigid exterior of the man society painted as unyielding, there existed a careful attention, an awareness that had been unnoticed, perhaps even by himself. In the days that followed, Eleanor began to learn the delicate rhythm of life within Ashborne. Each room told a story. The library, lined with leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of parchment, spoke of intellect and isolation. The drawing rooms, with their heavy curtains and gilded mirrors, revealed the weight of expectation and legacy. Here, a subtle gesture, a careful lowering of the eyes, a hand placed upon a railing, a courteous bow, was observed with more scrutiny than any spoken word. Eleanor, though spirited, felt the necessity to navigate this delicate lattice of social rules with finesse, her own wit and charm both a shield and a subtle rebellion. It was on the third evening, as the dusk painted the sky in muted shades of amber and violet, that the Duke presented her with a gift, a slender, intricately wrought locket, inside of which was a miniature portrait of his late wife. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she accepted it, aware that the gesture was laden with significance far beyond its material value. "It is my hope," the Duke murmured, his voice almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire, "that you may carry a piece of Ashbourne's history with you, and perhaps come to understand the life it has sheltered." The sincerity in his words, the vulnerability in his posture, struck Eleanor with a mixture of awe and compassion. Here was a man who had lived amidst grandeur yet remained tethered by memory and duty, and in this offering, a bridge toward connection was extended. Society, however, proved relentless in its scrutiny. During the Manor's first formal gathering, Eleanor was arrayed in a gown of deep emerald, the silk catching the candlelight in shimmering waves. Whispers followed her from the marble foyer to the ballroom. Some marveled at her beauty, others speculated on her motives, and a few dared to question her suitability for the Duke. Eleanor, her heart quickened, kept her composure, navigating the delicate steps of courtly dance while the Duke observed quietly from a distant gallery. His gaze, steady and discerning, followed her movements with an intensity that was both protective and quietly possessive. Eleanor felt a spark of understanding, a recognition that, despite the scrutiny of others, there existed a bond, unspoken yet palpable between them. The days turned into weeks, and within the quiet hours of the estate, moments of intimacy unfolded in small gestures. The Duke, once rigid in his solitude, began to involve Eleanor in the minutiae of Ashborne life, walking with her through the rose gardens at dawn, revealing the secrets of hidden alcoves, sharing the subtle joys of a library well-catalogued, or the careful cultivation of the estate's finest blooms. Eleanor, in turn, offered warmth and laughter, a brightness that had been absent from the Duke's chambers for decades. Each smile, each glance, each shared observation was a thread, weaving a tapestry of understanding and unspoken affection that neither could yet name aloud. Yet, tension lingered. Rumors spread beyond the estate walls, carried by the winds of gossip that never rested. Whispers of impropriety, of motives misunderstood, reached the ears of neighbors and relatives alike. Eleanor found herself in the delicate position of defending both her honor and the Duke's dignity, navigating the perilous waters of social expectation with tact and courage. In one such instance, a visiting cousin, perturbed by the age disparity and Eleanor's spirited demeanor, hinted at impropriety during a luncheon. The Duke's response, measured yet resolute, was an unspoken declaration of her worth. His subtle insistence on propriety and respect communicated more than words could convey. Eleanor, sensing the depth of his regard, felt a warmth that was at once terrifying and exhilarating. One evening, under the soft glow of the drawing-room's candlelight, Eleanor discovered a handwritten poem tucked beneath the folds of her desk, delicate lines of verse that spoke of memory, of sorrow, and of the quiet longing that had characterized the Duke's life. She read it, her breath caught between admiration and the sudden awareness of intimacy. Here was a man who, though feared by many, was capable of profound tenderness, a man who could articulate the silent ache of loneliness in ways that resonated deep within her own heart. The poem, a gift in its subtlety, became a talisman of trust, a quiet acknowledgment of the fragile bond beginning to take shape between them. As the evening wore on, a sudden knock at the door interrupted her reverie. A letter, delivered with the precision and gravity of Ashbourne's household protocol, bore news from the Duke's distant kin, an inquiry tinged with scrutiny, a reminder that society's eyes never rested. Eleanor felt a pang of anxiety, the delicate balance of their emerging connection threatened by forces beyond their immediate control. Yet when the Duke entered the room, his gaze meeting hers, there was no fear, only a quiet understanding, a shared resolve that whatever challenges arose, They would confront them together, each gesture and glance a testament to the growing intimacy that neither gossip nor circumstance could diminish. In that moment, Eleanor recognized that life within Ashborne Manor was a delicate dance of public expectation and private yearning. The Duke's gestures, the locket, the poems, the measured glances, spoke of a heart unaccustomed to trust, yet willing to offer it. And within Eleanor, a sense of purpose and courage began to flourish, the realization dawning that she was no mere spectator in this life, but a participant capable of shaping its course. As the candlelight flickered and the shadows lengthened across the library walls, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, understanding that this forced marriage, once a source of dread, might yet bloom into something unexpected, tender, and profound. The stage was now set for the trials and revelations that would follow, each day bringing new challenges, new gestures, and the slow, intricate weaving of hearts in a world bound by duty, reputation, and the unspoken language of longing. The storm had begun its slow descent over Ashbourne Manor by the time Eleanor found herself wandering the upper gallery, the sound of rain tapping against the tall windows like a distant drum, marking the passing of hours she scarcely felt. The candlelight in the hallway flickered against the polished wood, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls as though the house itself were alive, aware of the tension and longing that had taken root within its stone confines. Eleanor's thoughts drifted, restless, to the Duke. The man she had first regarded with trepidation now occupied a far more complex place in her mind, one of curiosity, sympathy, and a budding affection she had not anticipated. Every measured word, every subtle glance over the past weeks had chipped away at the rigid exterior she had believed impenetrable. In the library, the Duke awaited her, seated in the high-backed chair that had become his habitual throne, the fire casting a warm, amber glow across his lined features. He looked older than his years, yet there remained in his posture a certain dignity, a steadfastness that commanded respect without demanding it. As Eleanor approached, the storm outside seemed to soften, the patter of rain becoming a gentle accompaniment to the silence that hung between them. "Miss Whitmore," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "I trust one do not intrude upon your thoughts?" Eleanor, startled by the uncommon softness in his tone, shook her head. The words she had rehearsed in her mind dissolved, leaving only a tremor of sincerity she scarcely understood herself. He rose slowly, moving to the fireplace with a weight that belied the years he carried. "There is something I have kept hidden, even from myself, for longer than I care to admit," he said, his eyes not leaving the flames. Eleanor waited, heart quickened, sensing the gravity of the moment. She had glimpsed fragments of this man's solitude before, the locket, the poetry, but now there was an urgency, a confession hovering just beyond the threshold of speech. "I lived decades in the company of shadows," he continued, "shaped by duty, by loss, by the relentless expectation of society. I thought myself incapable of companionship, of warmth, until your presence here disrupted the patterns I had long accepted." Eleanor's breath caught, a mixture of astonishment and compassion flooding her senses. She stepped closer, emboldened by an instinctive empathy that overcame the caution imposed by years of social conditioning. I never imagined that my arrival could awaken anything," she murmured, her voice barely above the murmur of the fire. "Yet I do not know, perhaps a curiosity, or perhaps a hope." The Duke's gaze shifted to her, sharp and searching, and in that instant, a delicate understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile hearts that had begun to entwine. He extended his hand, a simple gesture weighted with centuries of solitude and unspoken longing. Eleanor, after a brief hesitation, placed her own in his, the warmth of their touch bridging the chasm of years and circumstance that had separated them. The Duke's lips parted, not in a formal declaration, but in a whispered admission of his own awakening. "I never believed I could feel again, yet here I am, caught in the gravity of your presence, unable to resist the pull of your spirit." Eleanor's eyes glistened, the storm outside mirroring the tempest within her own chest, and for the first time, the walls of decorum and expectation seemed to fade, leaving only the raw, unguarded truth between them. The hours passed in a hush of shared confidences. The Duke spoke of his lost wife, the years of mourning that had hardened his heart, and the weight of the estate that had become both sanctuary and prison. Eleanor listened, offering small nods, occasional questions, and the warmth of her attentive gaze, each response a balm to the solitude that had defined his existence. In turn, she revealed fragments of her own life, the pressures of her family, the whispers of society that had accompanied her since childhood, and the quiet rebellion of spirit that refused to be merely ornamental. Their words, gentle yet penetrating, formed a tapestry of understanding, each thread strengthening the fragile bridge of trust between them. As the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the room in fleeting flashes, Eleanor noticed the Duke's hand tremble slightly as he reached for a book upon the shelf, a volume of poetry she had admired days before. She moved to steady it, her fingers brushing his, and the simple contact sent a shiver of awareness through both of them. The firelight reflected in his eyes, revealing a vulnerability that few had ever seen, and Eleanor's heart swelled with a protective, almost reverential affection. "It is remarkable, the ease with which you understand these things," he admitted quietly. "And yet, I am unworthy of the comfort you offer." She shook her head softly, placing her hand over his. "No one is unworthy of companionship, of care, or of affection," she said, her voice firm yet tender. "And I will not be silent when kindness is needed." A pause settled over the room, profound and charged with unspoken desire. Neither dared to break the spell too quickly, each aware of the gravity of their proximity, each savoring the fragile intimacy that had blossomed from weeks of careful observation, quiet gestures, and tentative trust. Eleanor felt a stirring she had never encountered in her previous suitors, the sense that she was seen not as a duty, nor as a reflection of societal expectation, but as a partner in the truest sense of the word. The Duke's eyes softened, and for the first time, he allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile to touch his lips, a crack in the armor that had so long defined him. The moment was interrupted by a sudden rap at the door, precise and deliberate, shattering the delicate hush. Eleanor's hand flew to her chest, the spell broken, and the Duke's expression hardened once more, the shadows of propriety reclaiming their space. A footman entered with a letter, its wax seal pristine, bearing news from distant relatives, an inquiry tinged with concern and the ever-present specter of societal judgment. Eleanor sensed the tension in the Duke's shoulders, the weight of external expectation pressing once more upon the fragile intimacy they had nurtured. Yet, as he retrieved the letter, his gaze met hers, lingering just long enough to communicate an unspoken promise. Whatever storms rage beyond these walls, the connection forged in this library would endure. The storm outside abated as midnight approached, leaving a soft hush that settled over the estate like a protective veil. Eleanor retreated to her chamber with the sense that the evening had altered the course of their relationship irrevocably. She could no longer deny the curiosity, the concern, and the nascent affection that had taken root within her heart. Meanwhile, the Duke, alone with his thoughts and the embers of the dying fire, allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. In Eleanor, he had discovered not only a companion for the rigors of his estate and station, but a presence that stirred warmth, hope, and a fragile promise of love long deemed impossible. The distance between them had been measured in decades, yet was bridged now by the honesty of shared vulnerability and the silent acknowledgement of desire. In that quiet hour, as the moon cast a silver glow over Ashborne Manor, both Eleanor and the Duke understood that their journey had reached a crucial turning point. The walls of reserve had begun to crumble, leaving a space where longing, empathy, and the tender stirrings of romance could flourish. The storm outside had mirrored the turbulence within, and now, in the aftermath, a delicate equilibrium had been established. one that promised both challenge and reward, restraint and passion. The story that had begun with duty and apprehension now shimmered with the possibility of love, tempered by patience, understanding, and the whispered truths they had exchanged. Twilight descended over Ashborne Manor, painting the stone walls in hues of golden rose, the dying lights spilling across gardens still damp with the afternoon rain. Eleanor walked slowly through the cloistered arches of the chapel courtyard, her gown rustling softly against the cold stone. The scent of damp earth and crushed petals mingled with the faint aroma of burning candles from within the manor, creating a heady mixture that spoke of both renewal and solemnity. She paused at the edge of the fountain, its waters trembling in the breeze, and drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past weeks settle upon her like the delicate frost on the rose bushes. Every whispered glance, every unspoken word had brought them here, to this fragile, luminous moment. From the shadows of the chapel's arches emerged the Duke, his tall frame moving with the quiet assurance of a man accustomed to solitude, yet now tempered with a palpable vulnerability. Eleanor's heart quickened at the sight of him, noting the softened lines of his face, the way his eyes, once guarded and distant, now sought her presence with an intensity that pierced the veil of societal expectation. In the fading light, he appeared less a figure of fear and more a man unburdened by pretense, a soul who had borne grief with dignity and now stood ready to surrender to the unknown promise of love. Eleanor's breath caught, the silence between them heavy with anticipation and the unspoken acknowledgement of the journey they had undertaken together. He approached slowly, each step measured yet purposeful, until the distance between them was mere inches. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low and resonant, trembling slightly despite his usual composure. "These days, weeks, have revealed truths I had long believed impossible to embrace. I feared solitude, yet your presence has illuminated chambers of my heart I had thought forever darkened." Eleanor, her own emotions surging like the tide against the cliffs, stepped closer, drawn not merely by duty or circumstance, but by a burgeoning desire that had been nurtured in quiet moments, in shared confidences, and in the gentle unraveling of their guarded hearts. "I have watched you, and with each gesture, each word, I have understood," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "that life, even in its strictest forms, need not be barren of warmth. You have shown me the grace of patience, the courage of spirit, and the beauty of a heart unafraid to hope." Eleanor felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, the weight of emotion rendered almost tangible in the cool evening air. She reached for his hand, her fingers threading through his in a gesture both tender and assertive. "And you," she whispered, voice quivering with a mixture of awe and yearning, "have shown me that even the loneliest of hearts may find companionship, that love can grow in spaces once thought impossible." The Duke's lips curved in the faintest smile, a rare and precious expression that spoke more than words could convey.